I'll tell you a story the way I'd share it if we were sitting on a porch swing with a cup of coffee, not reading a speech, just talking straight from the heart. It all started one cool morning when I was pouring my first cup of coffee, watching the steam rise, the sun barely breaking over the ridge. That's when I noticed 3 people marching up the gravel road toward my gate, and right out front was this woman in a sharp red blazer. Looked more like she was going into battle than visiting a neighbor. Clipboard clutched to her chest, measuring tape dangling at her side like a weapon. And behind her, 2 nervous-looking folks who I later found out were part of the board. I set my cup down, flipped on the security cameras I'd just installed, and thought, well, this ought to be interesting. She strutted up like she owned the place and barked, "Mr. Dawson, I need immediate access for compliance inspection." Her voice had that bureaucratic twang, the kind that makes your skin itch. Before I could even answer, she shoved a paper through the bars, said I owed $3,000 in fines for unauthorized agricultural use and failure to meet community standards. I looked at that paper and thought, this thing is dressed up to look official, but it doesn't have a leg to stand on. I smiled, raised my thermos, and said, "Ma'am, you're welcome to inspect anything from the county road, but without proper documentation, nobody's stepping foot past this gate." Her cheeks went the same shade as her blazer, and she yanked out that tape measure like she was drawing a sword. She started measuring fence posts, scribbling notes, and it struck me. Why is she measuring if she's so sure of her authority? Something smelled off. So I called the sheriff, old friend of mine, and told him, "Mark, I got myself a situation." He just chuckled and said, "Don't let anyone on your land, Wes. I'll be there in 10. When Mark rolled up, he handled it calm as ever. He asked her for paperwork, looked it over, and flat out told her it wasn't valid. Missing signatures, no specific violations, nothing but bluff. And then his radio buzzed with a call about survey markers being disturbed right there on my property line. He turned, eyes sharp, and asked her straight, "Ma'am, have you been moving county markers?" You could feel the air thicken. She froze, pale as a ghost, and her board members stepped back like they wanted nothing to do with it. That's when I knew this wasn't just a spat over grass height or paint color. Something deeper was going on. 3 days later, I walked into the courthouse to dig through old records. My grandfather bought our land back in '54, and I still remember him walking me out to the big oak by the creek saying, "Son, this tree is your line, and no man can take it from you if you know your deeds." And sure enough, buried in those dusty books was proof. The road was ours, the boundaries clear, the rights spelled out in black ink decades before that subdivision ever existed. What's more, the so-called HOA had been building their fancy brick entrance and mailbox cluster smack on my property, without permission, for years. That discovery lit a fire in me. I hired a professional surveyor who dragged out GPS gear that looked like it belonged at NASA, and he confirmed it. Every line matched the old records, every stake in the ground was ours. And then he dropped the bomb. The HOA's entrance and mailboxes sat on 1.2 acres of my land. He tallied up back rent and damages to about 70 grand. My jaw nearly hit the dirt. And as if fate won a pile on, that same week I met Rebecca Shaw, a CPA who lived in the subdivision. She walked up with a folder thicker than a Bible and whispered, "I've been tracking irregularities in the books. That woman has been signing checks she has no authority to sign." She had proof of nearly $50,000 spent without approval, including that entrance project. It was like pulling back the curtain and finding rot everywhere. But here's where the story turned darker. One night, my security cameras caught a figure in red creeping along the fence line, yanking out the new survey stakes. The footage was crystal clear. Same red blazer, same posture. That wasn't just arrogance anymore. That was criminal. Sheriff Mark came back out, saw the tape, and said, "Wes, this is tampering with evidence. It's a crime now." The next morning, I woke to find a heavy chain stretched across my access road with signs saying closed for emergency safety. That chain cut off feed deliveries for my cattle, cost me money by the hour, and worse, stressed out my herd so bad the vet had to be called. Think about that. 40 head of cattle bawling at a gate because someone wanted to flex their power. That's when I realized this wasn't about community standards at all. This was about control, about intimidation, about someone so desperate to prove they had authority they were willing to hurt innocent animals and neighbors to do it. And just when I thought it couldn't go deeper, the county planning office called me. They discovered 8 years of fraudulent permit applications filed under my property address. Landscaping, drainage, lighting, all signed by the HOA without my consent. Fraud, plain and simple. I went down there, swore out statements, and suddenly the tide shifted. I wasn't the man on trial anymore. I was the victim of systematic abuse. Word spread. Neighbors started sharing their own stories. Fines over flower colors, playgrounds torn down for no reason, decks threatened despite county approval. Folks who'd been silent out of fear began stepping forward. And inside the board, a man named Tom Wilson had been quietly collecting evidence for months. Turns out, not everyone was drinking the Kool-Aid. At the emergency board meeting, the county sent a mediator. The room was packed with residents, lawyers, and a court reporter tapping away. The red blazer lady sat up front, trying to look unshaken, but when asked for her credentials, all she could show were expired city certificates that had nothing to do with HOAs. Her authority collapsed in real time. Then Tom stood up, hand shaking but voice steady, and laid out his evidence. Falsified minutes, unauthorized expenditures, forged signatures. Rebecca followed with her financial analysis, calmly showing the money trail. The room erupted. People who'd been scared finally spoke up, one after another, about harassment and bogus fines. You could see the fear leave the room like smoke, replaced with anger and a sense of justice. The board voted to suspend her on the spot. Now you'd think that was the end, but life's not that tidy. A day later, she showed up at my truck looking more human than I'd ever seen her. No red blazer, just tired eyes. She asked to meet privately, said there were things I didn't understand. I didn't trust her, not fully, but curiosity got the better of me. So I invited the sheriff to sit in as a neutral witness. At my kitchen table, she confessed. She told us how she'd been fired from her last job for overstepping authority, how she carried that shame like a scar, and how she thought by being tougher, by never bending, she could rebuild her career. But instead, she became a bully, hurting the very people she was supposed to serve. For the first time, I didn't see a monster. I saw someone broken, someone drowning in their own mistakes. I had every right to crush her legally, but instead, I offered another path. Restitution for damages, yes. Over $100,000 to set things right. But also education, training, a chance for her to help build programs so other compliance officers wouldn't repeat her mistakes. The sheriff backed it, and for once she just nodded, relief softening her shoulders. 3 weeks later, neighbors gathered on my ranch for the first property rights potluck. Sheriff manned the grill, Rebecca set up booths with information about property law, kids chased fireflies, and people who'd been divided were laughing together again. Even she showed up, dressed like a regular neighbor, carrying a casserole dish. The red blazer was gone, maybe for good. Standing by the oak tree that marked my grandfather's line, I realized the real victory wasn't about fines or fences. It was about respect, about people learning their rights, about a community deciding not to be ruled by fear anymore. Good fences might make good neighbors, but good information makes even better ones. And that's the story, friends. But I'll leave you with this question. What would you have done? Would you have fought fire with fire, taken her to court and buried her? Or would you have tried, like I did, to turn a mess into a chance for redemption? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear where you stand. And if this story got you thinking, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's ever had their own run-in with an HOA or any kind of power trip neighbor. Because these stories, well, they're not just about land, they're about how we choose to live together.